Last week, I introduced my dark matter theory, which was a theory designed to help us better understand Deltarune's dark world. I would say dark matter theory was successful in explaining several core mechanics of the dark world, but where it fell short was with regards to the origin of this realm. Dark fountains, in particular, are still extremely mysterious, so in order to better understand this mysterious world, I set out to formulate a follow-up theory that explains all the properties of these fountains. To be precise, I sought to find answers to the following questions. Where do dark fountains come from? What are they made of? Why can you summon a dark fountain by stabbing the ground? Why do they have the power to warp reality and bring objects to life? And why is Kris the only person who can seal these fountains? While it was no easy task, after many hours of research and analysis, I believe I've found a theory capable of answering all of these questions. In fact, this theory not only explains dark fountains, but also completely reframes how we're meant to view the world of Deltarune. And I'm not just talking about the dark world. This theory tackles the dark world, the light world, and potentially even the world of Undertale. And the name of this theory, as you've likely noticed, is Lifestream theory. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's recap what we know about dark fountains. According to Queen, they are created when someone focuses their determination into a blade and uses it to thrust a fountain from the earth. Already, this is suggesting a supernatural origin to this phenomenon, as determination is effectively a reality-warping superpower generated by souls. In Undertale, we use determination to save and load, and while saving and loading are its main function, it's entirely possible that determination has other uses as well. Perhaps by channeling determination offensively, you can cut a hole in the fabric of existence, and it is through this hole that the dark fountains flood into our reality. That might seem like a leap, but given that the alternative is that dark fountains spring into existence every time you dig a hole, which sounds absurd, I'd say a transdimensional phenomena that relies on determination to occur is a lot more reasonable. Aside from their origins, we should also take note of the powers that these dark fountains possess. They can warp physical reality, as seen with them transforming small rooms into entirely new worlds, and they can bring objects to life, as seen with the Darkners. These two powers alone are already very puzzling, as bringing things to life and rewriting reality are largely unprecedented in this franchise. Sure, determination could let you save and load, but it didn't let you create entirely new worlds from nothing. That sort of rewriting of reality was something only godlike entities such as Omega Flowey or Azrael were capable of. And bringing inanimate objects to life has basically never happened prior to Deltarune. Sure, Alphys was able to create Flowey and the Amalgamates, but I wouldn't consider either of those to be the same phenomena as what we see with Darkners. With the Amalgamates, they were already sort of alive and were simply kept alive by determination. And as for Flowey, he was already a flower, aka a living thing. He just wasn't sentient yet. Honestly, the only examples of objects coming to life in Undertale are when ghosts possess inanimate objects, such as the Mad Dummy or Metaton. However, even that isn't really the same as what's happening with Darkners. Darkners are not spirits inhabiting objects, they are literally objects that have been granted life. So to compare the two isn't exactly accurate. However, I will point out that if a ghost becomes permanently attached to an object, such as what happens with the Glad Dummy, then it is possible for that inanimate object to be permanently alive. And as it stands, that's pretty much the closest thing we have as far as a reference point to understand what's happening with the Darkners. That means the only real conclusion that I can reach about this phenomena is that in order to bring something to life, some sort of soul or soul energy must be involved. And saying that dark fountains have a connection to souls isn't even that crazy of a conclusion, as we are pretty explicitly shown that Kris's soul is instrumental in sealing dark fountains, proving that the soul connection is already there. In short, all we can really conclude about dark fountains as a result of them having these powers is that they likely have some connection to souls due to their ability to bestow life, and they are likely pulling from some sort of godlike power source given the fact that they can warp reality. Now, that's the basics of dark fountains covered, but there's still a few miscellaneous attributes worth mentioning. For one, as we learned the hard way in Chapter 2, Darkners will turn to stone if they visit a different dark fountain. Although, curiously, this is not a hard and fast rule, as Ralsei says that they only may not belong there, implying Darkners could visit other dark worlds in some circumstances. Furthermore, this rule about turning to stone is completely abandoned with regards to the castle town, as any Darkner can live there, supposedly because its fountain is made of pure darkness. This explanation from Ralsei also reveals another notable attribute, namely, he specifically states that Darkners reflect the will of their dark fountain. This is a pretty radical concept, as by saying they have wills, Ralsei is implying that dark fountains are somehow alive and intelligent. This idea is further supported by the conclusions we reached in the dark matter theory. As you may recall, we noted that dark fountains seem to empower the souls of nearby Lightners, especially Kris. This led us to conclude that dark fountains are at least partially composed of soul energy, or as I like to call it, hopes and dreams. And if they have soul energy, then it's not unreasonable to think these dark fountains are alive. Now, with this information laid out, I think we're starting to paint a picture of what these dark fountains really are. That said, there is one major aspect of these fountains that I've yet to discuss, namely the consequence of summoning too many dark fountains. I am of course talking about the Roaring. The Roaring, according to Ralsei, is an apocalyptic event that occurs if too many dark fountains are opened up. He says that when the light is subsumed by shadow, when the fountains fill the sky, all will fall into chaos. The Titans will take form from the fountains and envelop the land in devastation. The surviving Darkners, crushed by the darkness, will slowly, one by one, turn into statues, leaving the Lightners to fend for themselves, lost eternally in an endless night. That is a lot to take in. But wait, there's more. While not explicitly connected, it can be assumed that the legend of the Deltarune is connected to the Roaring, as both are brought up by Ralsei and describe an apocalypse. This is notable because in the legend, the earth itself draws its final breath, implying that the Roaring is tied to the end of the world. That is some pretty heavy stuff, and it also raises several new questions. What are these Titans? Why are they a force of destruction? What does it mean that they are formed from the fountains? Why do all the Darkners turn to stone during the Roaring? Does that mean the darkness unleashed by the Roaring isn't pure darkness, like Ralsei's Castletown? That seems odd, since you'd think flooding the world with darkness would ensure that Darkners would never turn to stone. And yet, apparently, during the Roaring, darkness crushes the Darkners. What is that about? Needless to say, while we've been given some information, it seems like a great deal of this prophecy is left completely ambiguous. It's vague, poetic, and just not very specific in terms of what it's describing. However, I believe I've stumbled across a key detail that may shine a light on this entire mystery. This detail has largely slipped under most people's radars, but despite that, it has remained a key component of the Dark Fountain mythos in both chapters. In fact, it was this detail, and this detail alone, that allowed me to formulate the Lifestream theory. What is this mysterious detail that shines such an incredible light on the Dark Fountain mystery? Well, that is quite simple. The detail I'm referring to is Earth. The Earth itself is the key to all of this. Every single element of this mystery, from the Dark Fountains to the Titans, is tied up with the concept of the Earth. To show you what I mean, let's look at every instance in which the Earth has come up. When describing how to create dark fountains, the Queen repeatedly mentions the Earth. She says the knight thrust a fountain from the Earth, and that Noelle needs to stab the Earth in order to create a neo-dark fountain. The king similarly describes the night as pulling fountains from the earth. During the legend of Deltarune, Rousey states that the earth, with her heart pounding, will draw her final breath. And Alphys mentions how the Symptons discover another earth on the other side of the sun during Sympton's Galaxy Force. Okay, maybe that last one doesn't matter, but the rest of these certainly do. You see, from these few lines regarding the Earth, I was able to reach some pretty major revelations, which in turn allowed me to formulate my Lifestream theory. In fact, now that we've covered all the raw data surrounding Dark Fountains, I'd say we're ready to reveal my theory in full. Brace yourselves, loyal viewers, this one's a doozy. So, what is Lifestream theory? Well, to put it as simply as I possibly can, Lifestream theory holds that the Earth is alive. That's right, alive. And I don't mean that metaphorically or poetically or any other fancy way. I mean that the Earth is a living, breathing, supernatural organism. Sounds crazy, I know, but the evidence doesn't lie. We know that dark fountains originate from the Earth, and that dark fountains themselves are alive in some capacity. We also know that fountains must utilize some sort of godlike power source in order to warp reality as much as they do. And what could be more godlike than the power of an entity the size of a planet? In fact, I can take it a step further. Not only is the Earth alive, but it also has a soul. This is hinted at by Rousey, who describes the Earth as having a heart, which is used to represent souls in Undertale and Deltarune. This is further supported by the fact that dark fountains seem to be at least partially composed of soul energy, and if this literal fountain of soul energy originates from the Earth, then that pretty strongly suggests that the Earth itself has a soul. In fact, I would argue that dark fountains are effectively a sort of spiritual blood, and that when we create dark fountains, we are actually inflicting a wound upon the soul of Mother Earth herself. However, since it's literally a godlike entity the size of a planet, you can't wound it with any old weapon. No. In order to wound the Earth herself, you would need something capable of going toe-to-toe with a god. You would need something capable of cutting through time and space. You would need determination. That is what Queen unknowingly discovered. Only the power of determination is potent enough to inflict wounds upon such a godlike entity. This is not a new concept either, as we know that determination is so potent that it allowed Frisk to hold their own against an entity with literal infinite power. That is just how crazy determination is. That is also why the creation of dark fountains will result in the end of the world. We aren't just using determination to create little nifty dark worlds to play in, we are using determination on a knife to literally stab the planet to death. That is why Darkners all eventually turn to stone during the Roaring. Even though darkness covers the land, the soul energy that brought the Darkners to life and keeps them alive will eventually run out thanks to the Earth drawing her final breath. Because, we stabbed her to death. Furthermore, the reason that the castle town can support any Darkners is because the wound that created this grand fountain was much deeper than any other. And since it was such a severe wound, it unleashed far more raw soul energy than any other fountain, which allows a much more diverse variety of Darkners to survive here. And crazy enough, that's just the tip of the iceberg. Once we apply Lifestream theory to the information Rousey gave us about the legend and the Roaring, a fascinating picture starts to unfold. You see, we know that if you create too many dark fountains, titans will emerge from those fountains and wreak havoc upon the land. That of course raises the question, how does this tie in to the Earth being alive? Well, that's simple. The Titans are actually the Earth's natural defense system. If dark fountains are a surge of her blood, then Titans are effectively the antibodies within that blood. When her life is in danger from suffering too many wounds, these Titans emerge to do battle with whatever's causing all this harm. This in turn brings us to why I named my theory the way I did. You see, if you've played Final Fantasy VII, then all of this probably sounds pretty familiar. I won't dive into any major spoilers, but in that game, the Earth is also alive, and the bad guys intentionally wound her in order to harness the life force that bubbles forth from the wound. This life force of the planet in Final Fantasy VII is called the Lifestream, and given its similarities to what we see in Deltarune, I chose to name my theory after that. And much like the Titans from the Prophecy, the Lifestream of FF7 is also capable of producing colossal creatures whose purpose is to protect the Earth from whatever is wounding her. We know that Toby Fox is a big Final Fantasy fan, and there are even cheeky little references to the franchise in Deltarune, so I don't think it's unreasonable to believe he's taken inspiration from that series when coming up with the lore of his games. Even the idea of there being an angel we need to fight at the end of the game is pretty familiar territory if you know anything about Final Fantasy. That said, while Final Fantasy VII was certainly a major influence, there are plenty of original ideas woven into Deltarune as well. For example, it is stated by Rousey that Kris is the only one capable of sealing dark fountains. This seems odd at first glance, as Queen makes it clear that anyone can create a dark fountain provided they have determination. This raises the question, why can anyone create dark fountains, but only Kris can close them? Well, I believe it is once again tied to their unique soul. Remember, when Kris approaches a dark fountain, they send forth their soul, which they describe as glowing. They then release a huge surge of soul energy, and a few moments later, the dark fountain is completely sealed. Given what we see, I can only conclude that Kris is effectively healing the wound that the knight created. They are able to do this because Kris is unique in that their soul contains more than one person. There's Kris themselves in addition to whatever entity is possessing them. Whether you say that entity is Asriel or the player or whoever else doesn't really matter. What matters is that this soul is a combination of two entities, and we know from Undertale that even just two souls working together can create a being of incredible power. Just take Asriel and Kara, for example. Before fusing, they were merely a human child and a monster child, two entities considered far weaker than adult humans. However, after they fused together, they became so powerful that they could have easily wiped out an entire human settlement. That is a massive power boost, and it is through this power that Kris, and only Kris, is capable of sealing dark fountains. Only a person overflowing with soul energy could possibly heal a wound in the soul of an entity as gargantuan as the Earth. Another aspect of the legend that stands out to me is this mysterious angel's heaven. Now, I won't be doing a deep dive on the angel itself, as that entity really deserves its own dedicated video. However, the history of conflict between the Earth and the angel is still worth discussing. You see, in both Undertale and Deltarune, the angel has been consistently depicted as antagonistic towards the Earth. Case in point, in Rousey's prophecy, the angel's heaven only appears after the Earth has died, suggesting it may have played a role in that death. And in Undertale, although you may not quite remember it this way, we do actually get to experience a direct battle between the Earth and the angel. The battle I am referring to is the one between Kara, aka the Angel of Death, and our good friend Undyne the Undying. Now, you may be thinking, but Jaru, what does Undyne have to do with the Earth? And the answer is, quite a lot. You see, upon Undyne first transforming, a very ominous choir song can be heard. As this song plays, Undyne gives her speech about how she can tell that the player isn't just a threat to her. They are a threat to humans, monsters, and everything else. The whole world, the whole Earth is in jeopardy. And so, in a moment that cannot be explained with mere determination, Undyne finds herself in contact with every other soul on the planet, which she describes as feeling their hearts beating as one. She then experiences a surge of energy so intense that it not only reforms her entire body, but it also gives her so much raw power that she ends up being the only person in the entire No Mercy route capable of withstanding not one, not two, but over a dozen attacks from the player. That is insane. Toriel, Papyrus, Mettaton, and even Sans all die in just one hit, but not Undyne. She can take it. And why can she endure such demonic power when nobody else could? Because the power of the earth was on her side. That's why the song that plays during her speech is called "But the Earth Refused to Die." Do you see what I mean? The planet realized the threat that the player posed and chose Undyne to be her champion. For all intents and purposes, in the Undertale reality, Undyne the Undying was the equivalent of the Titans. Just like them, she was created by the Earth to save the world. That is why she can hold her own against the player. She is literally wielding apocalyptic power. And yet, even with all of the Earth's power backing her up, the player still prevails, showing that the Angel of Death wielded more power than even the Earth herself. That is why the final boss of the legend is the Angel's Heaven, and not the Titans. The Earth may be godlike, but the Angel is literally omnipotent. Now, I could say a lot more about the Angel, but I'll save that for another time. For now, let's reel it back in a bit, as we still have a few more things to discuss regarding the Lifestream theory. While we have covered most of the core plot elements surrounding the Earth and its role in Deltarune, before we end the video, I'd like to take a deeper look at the Earth's role in Undertale. Based on what we see with Undyne, it seems safe to say that the Earth is just as much alive in the Undertale reality as she is in the Deltarune reality. That might seem strange, since the Earth being alive is never directly acknowledged in the original game. However, I would argue that's because the nature of the Earth simply wasn't relevant to the story being told in that game. And while it wasn't relevant to the main plot, I believe the Earth and the dark fountains it creates were secretly integral to the backstory of the Underground. To be precise, I think Gaster utilized the blood of the planet to create his most famous invention. I am of course talking about the core. You see, we've always known that Gaster was doing experiments involving darkness, as that is the main focus of the infamous Entry 17. However, because of that, we've never been able to make heads or tails of this entry, as the concept of darkness simply wasn't relevant in Undertale. But, thanks to Deltarune, we now know what we are dealing with. It seems incredibly likely that something Gaster created had the properties of a dark fountain, which can only mean that in his research, Gaster found a way to wound the planet. This makes sense, as you need determination to create dark fountains, and one of the main focuses of Gaster's experiments was determination. We know this is the case, as Alphys was only able to create the determination extraction machine thanks to the leftover blueprints presumably created by Gaster. As such, it seems only logical to conclude that Gaster figured out how to create dark fountains, and from there he used that power to create the core. Now, you may be wondering, why do I think the core in particular utilizes dark fountains? Well, there's a couple reasons. For one, Alphys believes it simply uses geothermal energy. But not only does she cut herself off before explaining it, implying she doesn't really know how it works, but she also doesn't explain how a regular geothermal plant can create magical electricity. By contrast, if the core was using a dark fountain as its energy source, which we know are capable of warping reality and generating magical effects, it would make perfect sense for the electricity it produces to be magical as well. Furthermore, not only does the core literally plug into the planet, something you would have to do in order to access a dark fountain, but it also has some very suspicious structures inside it. Specifically, I would like to draw your attention to these pillars. They already look super mysterious, especially since they literally plunge into a bottomless pit of darkness, but it actually gets even stranger when you discover what these things are called. You see, when you look in the code, you find that these pillars are called darkness totems. Needless to say, it doesn't really make any sense for a normal power plant to have darkness totems lying around. By contrast, if the core is an elaborate invention of Gaster's designed to harness power from dark fountains, then these darkness totems start to make a lot more sense. Furthermore, it's mentioned that Gaster shattered across time and space when he fell into one of his creations. We never get to find out which creation this is referring to, but given what we know now, I'd say there's an above average chance that the creation in question was the core. After all, falling into the soul of a planet doesn't sound like a super survivable experience. Heck, in Final Fantasy VII, the Lifestream literally transcends time itself, so the idea that Gaster was shattered by the soul of the planet is actually fairly believable. Speaking of Final Fantasy VII, remember how I said the bad guys harness the power of the Lifestream? Well, what I didn't mention was how exactly they do that. The answer is that they use gigantic metal power plants to pull Lifestream from the Earth and then convert it into electricity. Sound familiar? And just to add a last bit of icing to my theory crafting cake, I believe my Lifestream theory may actually offer an explanation for the origins of the save and load mechanic. I know, this is kinda coming out of nowhere, but I'm not joking. You see, thanks to various extra materials, it's been suggested that in Undertale, saving and loading is only possible while in the underground. Similarly, you can only save and load in Deltarune while in the Dark World. This may lead you to ask, what is the reason for this limitation? Well, I believe it is tied to the Earth's soul. I think that by getting closer to the Earth's soul, and especially by getting close to a dark fountain, reality itself begins to destabilize. This lack of stability in space and time is what creates the opportunity for strong-willed individuals to reshape reality. In other words, the saving and loading mechanics can only be used in a context where reality is so unstable that determination alone is all you need to control the timeline. In the cases of Omega Flowey and Asriel, they are already so powerful that they can destabilize reality on their own, which is why they can control the timeline even while on the surface. By contrast, in the cases of Frisk, Kris, and regular Flowey, they can't access their save files without an external power source destabilizing reality on their behalf. That is why going underground has been such a recurring motif in both games. They simply cannot control the timeline without the assistance of the Earth's soul. And with that, I think I've finally run out of things to say about this topic. I'll be honest, I never thought we'd end up discussing the save and load mechanics when I was writing the script for this video, but dear God, that is where we ended up. This theory sure went in a lot of different directions, didn't it? Oh, also, you want to hear something funny? So, you know how this theory ended up discussing both the Earth from Undertale and the Earth from Deltarune? Well, depending on how you look at it, you could argue that Alfie's comment about the Symptons finding another Earth was actually foreshadowing for this very plot. And if that is true, if that is really what Toby Fox intended, then that is hilarious. Anyway, with that said, I think we've done enough theory crafting for one day. To summarize my Lifestream theory, I believe the Earth is quite literally alive, and even has a soul. When we stab the ground to create dark fountains, we are wounding the planet and causing its lifeblood to flow forth. This lifeblood is so potent and so packed full of soul energy that it warps reality and creates dark fountains. If too many dark fountains are created, then the Earth will release titans to defend itself, causing widespread devastation. And once the Earth fully dies, the Darkners will all turn to stone due to them no longer having access to the soul energy that kept them alive in the first place. Only those with determination can harm the Earth thanks to the reality warping powers that determination provides, and only Kris can heal the Earth, as thanks to them being possessed, they're the only one with enough soul energy to patch up the Earth's wounds. And that is it. With this theory complete, I reckon we have a pretty firm grasp on the Dark World and how it functions. But that's just my opinion. What do y'all think of this theory? Do you think I missed anything, or do you have your own additions you'd like to make? I'd love to hear what you have to say, so make sure to leave your thoughts in the comments down below. And make sure to subscribe if you want to hear more of my theories about Deltarune. Before we head out, I'd like to give a huge shout out to my patrons for their continued support. A special thanks goes to Erol, Limping Penguin, and Tibby Fitzhugh. And a huge thanks goes to Spindrift for being the only big shot willing and able to support me on the Spampton tier. And with all that said, I think I'm about ready to sign out. Like if you enjoyed the video, comment if you've got something to say, subscribe if you want to see more, and as always, have a fantastic day.